In this video, we'll look at how to create the research question for your IA. We'll discuss what a research question exactly is, see how to use the initial ideas that we brainstormed in the previous video, and finally, we'll learn how to choose your variables. So let's see what we mean by research question. Sometimes people overcomplicate the research question. There's no need to do this, because the research question simply connects the independent and the dependent variable. It basically asks, how does the independent variable affect the dependent variable? Keep in mind that the research question might include a few more details, depending on the context of your experiment, but generally it is a simple connection between your independent and dependent variable. Next, we'll move on to explore how you can use your initial ideas that you brainstormed in the previous video to create a research question. First, we'll work with interests and hobbies. Now, to help us create a research question, I also included a variables list that includes common variables that are often used in IAs and that, in general, are easy to work with. Again, the idea here is to keep things simple and to design an experiment that you can carry out in your school's lab or even at home. So let's now see some examples of how you can use your interests and hobbies along with the variables list to create research questions. If we choose, for instance, basketball as a hobby, we can work with the pressure in the ball and bounce height. Of course, here the bounce height depends on the pressure in the ball, so pressure is our independent and height is our dependent variable. Therefore, our research question is, how does the pressure in the ball affect its bounce height? In our second example, we'll use trains, mass, and distance to write how does the mass of a train affect the distance traveled when the train rolls down a slope. Finally, we'll use street music, height, and frequency, and get how does the height of the water in a glass affect the frequency of the sound wave. For the final version of your IA, you'd likely refine these research questions to include specific details about the context of the situation. For the third research question, for instance, you could include the fact that it was inspired by watching a street musician who was performing on singing glasses. If you want to see such a performance, just type street music singing glasses into YouTube. Next, let's move on to the physics topics from our brainstorming session. In our first example, we'll take sound in the topic of waves and choose distance and intensity as our two variables. So our research question here is, how does the distance from a sound source affect intensity? In our next example, let's assume that you carry out an experiment to determine how gravitational potential energy is converted into kinetic energy by releasing a ball from different heights on a slope and measure the speed of the ball at the bottom of the slope. Then when you are thinking about your IA research question, you remember this experiment and come up with a modified version for your IA. You take the angle of the slope with the horizontal as your independent and the maximum speed of the object as your dependent variable, while also deciding to change the ball to a toy car. Here is the resulting research question that you develop for your IA. Now that we have seen 5 research question examples, we are ready to move on to think about and to test our experiment. This is what we'll do in the next video.